All right, so this video might be a little bit more advanced. I'm going to kind of walk you through how I managed to transition my icon generator AI application from AWS Amplify to using SST for deployment. So I made videos prior about SST and how it's basically an open source way to deploy your next application. There's like a plugin that you can use for deploying next sites. And behind the scenes, it sets up a CloudFront distribution, it sets up your Lambdas, it sets up a bunch of other stuff so that it basically runs your next app. I did run into a couple snags when I was trying to set this up, and I figured, hey, I would share the information for anyone else who wants to kind of transition or just set up an SST. And by watching this video, you might also learn a little bit more about infrastructure and how like some of the stuff works at a higher level. So let's do a quick little diagram, right? So I had a deployment on Amplify. So I had some code running on Amplify, and I instead wanted to get this code deployed to AWS using SST. I guess I should just say SST, but for those who don't know what SST is, it's basically just spinning up different resources on Amazon for you. This is a managed service that Amazon will upcharge on different things for, and this is like the bare bones stuff that you need to basically achieve the same stuff that Amplify is doing for deploying your next application. And like I mentioned in some other videos, SST gives you more flexibility. You can actually like choose and configure the CloudFront distribution how you want. You can set up other resources. It just uses CDK under the hood, which is another infrastructure as code tool that Amazon provides. So let's talk about the issue. I had my site deployed to Amplify. So if you scroll down to the sst.dev site, I ran this command, and then I basically ran this command. Okay, there's a little bit of nuance I need to explain. But once you run this command, it's going to create a couple of directories in your project. For example, we have a SST config here. And this is the meat and potatoes of like getting your next site deployed. Okay, all this stuff you're seeing here, this is CDK. This is something that's provided from Amazon, and you can use these functions to basically spin up different resources in Amazon. I use a lot of Terraform at work, but CDK is another potential solution you can use to kind of spin up resources and manage them. So looking through this code, basically, I'm just declaring some new stuff. Like, for example, I'm declaring a cache policy that says, hey, never cache in CloudFront using a cookie. I'm declaring a certificate to allow me to deploy my application to this domain. I am declaring a Next.js site. This is like a wrapper for a bunch of underlying CDK functions probably that spin up CloudFront, Lambdas, CloudWatch log groups, stuff like that. But you can see here I pass in the cache strategy. I increase the timeout. I have memory sizes. I have the custom domain up here. I pass in a bunch of environment variables, and then I have some output. So I kind of set up like the bare minimum of this code, and I try to get it deployed. And what happens was my deployment actually started to fail. So it was failing because I have this all under the same Amazon account, right? This is all under the same Amazon account. And behind the scenes, SST and Amplify were both trying to basically spin up a CloudFront distribution. And the distribution had the same like names. So SST kept failing. I couldn't deploy with SST while this Amplify thing was still hosted. So you might say, okay, why don't you just delete your Amplify hosting and then run SST, right? And that was an option. But for whatever reason, I said, hey, I'm going to try to do this with absolutely no downtime for my users. Although I don't really have that many users, let's be honest. I have maybe like 4 people who view the site every minute or so or less. I decided to challenge myself and say, how can I kind of do this with as little downtime as possible? So deleting this wasn't an option. So what I did instead was I decided, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin up a DigitalOcean droplet. So I went over to DigitalOcean and I logged in and I went to their app platform and I basically just pointed that at my Git repo. I set up some environment variables and I got my next app completely deployed. I want to say I'm not sponsored by DigitalOcean. I just really like DigitalOcean. I think they have a lot of cool services in here and it's very easy to kind of get stuff up and running. There's other solutions out there as well, but the reason I like app platform is that they host a CDN in front of your stuff. So like by default, all your stuff's going to get cached into Cloudflare CDN, and I like that. Other solutions like Railway don't really give you that out of the box. So I basically set up another deployment. Let me just go ahead and add one here. I will put one and I will say DigitalOcean. So let's draw another box for my DNS provider, which I'm using Google Domains. So inside of Google Domains, what I did was this used to point to the Amplify URL, okay? So if a user, let me close out of this. So if a user, let's say if we can just find like a user here. I'll do icon, a user, here we go. So basically, if a user tried to go to my website, the DNS provider would point them to my Amplify distribution, right? Or my Amplify deployment, whatever you want to call it. So what I did is I deployed the entire site to DigitalOcean. I verified it. I clicked through. I made sure everything seems good. I could generate icons. People could log in. Awesome. So what I did was I changed the DNS settings to point this to my DigitalOcean deployment. So basically what happens is this can take some time. Like it can take up to an hour. Sometimes they say it can take up to 42 hours. I didn't wait that long. I waited about an hour. But over time, users will start getting redirected to the new deployment as the DNS propagates throughout the network. Okay, so at some point, this will kind of like get less and less and less traffic, and then it just goes away. So that allowed me to basically have the application still running. And then I went to my Amplify dashboard and I went ahead and just deleted that. All right, so now I didn't have Amplify running in Amazon, and I had the ability to do an SST deployment. So now I actually went through and I kind of deployed all this code. Now to deploy this, at first I was deploying from my local machine. And I'll tell you an issue with that in a second. But basically I just did a SST deploy. You can see here we have SST deploy and I say stage prod. Okay, so that's deploying like a production stage for my next application. And now this is fully running in Amazon. So after I deployed this, you can go to CloudFront and you can get like a domain that you can kind of play around with. So I kind of went to that, I logged in, I checked it out, and I noticed that my TRPC endpoints were actually throwing a lot of exceptions. And that's because after looking through the CloudWatch logs, I noticed that I was getting tons of Prisma errors. So unfortunately, it turns out that when you build SST and try to deploy it from your laptop, it's actually grabbing like Prisma binaries that were built for Mac specifically, like the Mac operating system. So in order to get this working, I actually had to do quite a lot of extra work, right? There's probably other ways I could do this. I could make like a container and just like build and deploy from a container locally on my laptop. But I decided, you know what? Since I want to make this professional, I'm going to set up a CI/CD pipeline. And before I do that, I had to actually add this binary targets and add this Linux ARM OpenSSL to this, right? So this was to allow Prisma to work when I deploy it to the Lambda under SST. Now, the second thing I had to do was I actually set up a GitHub workflow, a GitHub Actions workflow that when I push code to my main branch, it actually does an SST deploy down here, right? And I had to like set up all these secrets. I had to go to my GitHub account over here. I had to go to settings. I had to go to secrets and variables and actions. I had to set up all these different secrets and all these different variables so that when I built and deployed from GitHub Actions, it would have all the information it needed to successfully do a deployment. So here's me trying to deploy it out. It failed like 5-8 times. Got a couple of successful ones. And then at some point, I noticed that the TRPC stuff was working fine. All right, everything was deployed out. It was working fine. I didn't have the domain yet. I didn't do the switch over yet. But I had the CloudFront domain that I could hit and basically test it out. Now, one thing I noticed is that when I tried to generate an icon, I would get a really strange TRPC error, and I had no idea what was happening because I actually went to the CloudWatch logs and looked through them, and I didn't see any errors. But my stuff was failing. And after about an hour of like looking into all the logs and trying to figure out what's going on, I realized that, hey, my endpoints were actually timing out because when you do a standard SST deployment, it turns out that they give you 10 seconds. So I had to go into this and I had to configure this to say, hey, do a 30-second limit on my Lambdas. And also I bumped up the memory from 1024 to 2048. This makes your Lambdas run a lot faster, and it does cost a little bit more, but they run faster, they have more memory, they have more CPU. But the important part is I'm doing a bunch of image processing inside my Lambdas, so that really sped up how fast these Lambdas take to run and scale these images down as they're being generated from the Dolly API. Okay, so basically, I made those changes. I did a git add, git commit, git push. That rebuilt everything. I won't even talk about the domains. I wasted like 30 minutes, an hour trying to figure out these domains and like the certificates and stuff. It was a big pain, but I managed to get that all going and then validated the certificates and stuff. But at that point, everything seemed fine. It was deployed out. I went to the CloudFront domain. I clicked around. Everything was good. I generated icons. I was able to log in, log out. And I was like, okay, well, I think we're good. So I waited about another hour. I mean, like, let's be honest, like 2, 3, 4 hours passed by, and I actually went to bed and then woke up and did this in the morning. So then I woke up and said, let's go to Google Domains and let's change this to my new CloudFront distribution. Okay, so now it's going to point to my SST deployment. And basically the same idea as before, we have all the traffic now is slowly going to get migrated and routed to this new domain as time goes by. Now, I will say this is probably not the safest way. I'm pretty sure I had downtime. Some users probably had the domain cached and they were getting redirected to a broken instance. But overall, I mean, like, I don't have that many users. If you wanted to do this in like a live environment, you probably wouldn't want to do the routing via DNS. You probably want to have like a load balancer in front of these two things, and then you can just switch the load balancer and all your traffic will just go to the new service. I didn't really have a load balancer set up, and I didn't want to go down that path because that's just a bunch of extra work for an app that's really used by no one. But at that point, everything was moved over to SST. I could delete the DigitalOcean deployment, which I did. And then now if you go over here, you can basically verify that everything is working through your SST deployment by, if you just load up like any of these files and click on them. Before, when it was on DigitalOcean, it kept saying Cloudflare, and then it also said like cache missed from Cloudflare. But when it started saying CloudFront, I knew that my traffic was basically hitting the SST deployment on Amazon. Okay. Now, again, I had to keep on waiting. I had to like wait an hour because if you actually just keep on refreshing the page, it'll kind of go back and forth between your DigitalOcean deployment and your SST deployment. So you have to wait till all your DNS propagates. Again, that can take quite a long time. So, all right, so that's basically how I managed to deploy this whole thing and switch it over from Amplify to SST. So my final thoughts, I'm going to mention this, is like, if you're not big into DevOps and you don't understand any of the stuff I just said, this is why you probably just want to use Vercel, right? You're going to save yourself so much headache and time just using a pre-existing service that's built for Next and will deploy Next with a basic click of a button. And it has first-class support for all the Next features. So this is why, I mean, you should probably use Vercel if you have no idea what I just said. But for someone like me, I've been working in the industry for almost 10 years and I've done a lot of DevOps stuff. I used to mess with Puppet. I used to like configure Jenkins boxes. Before that, I think I messed with Chef. I'm big into containers. I've done a ton of Amazon stuff. I've done Circle CI setups. I've done GitHub Actions setups. So a lot of this stuff is not foreign to me. But I could see someone who's not really familiar with what the heck is going on to be completely lost. And especially having to like learn a new CDK and then like this SST that's on top of CDK. It's a lot. It's not for the faint of heart. So I would highly recommend to use an existing service such as DigitalOcean app platform. That thing works great. It's just like when you need to have like the most fine-grained control and like performance of your next application, that's when like something Vercel is going to do the best, because it has all this caching in mind. And I really don't think this application I have would probably cost any more than like 50 cents a month, which is why I'm sticking to Amazon. Yeah, that's all I really wanted to walk you all through. At some point I will come back and I will measure if I saved much money. If I go to my billing dashboard, today is the first day I kind of switched over to SST, so it's about 5 cents. Okay, these are the previous days. This is all in Amplify. So I haven't finished the day yet, so this could probably go up a little bit higher. But overall, I think you'll see that like this cost for having stuff deployed to SST is going to be much lower. And I'll make a video in maybe like a week or two and just compare the bar charts, and we can see for sure like how much of a savings am I actually getting using SST. Because some of the stuff that was kind of concerning me is that my forecast kept going up and up. Like I'm seeing alerts that I'm getting 3,000% more charges on my deployments. And that's a pretty big increase. So another reason I want to kind of say that I'm kind of concerned about being on Amplify is that if you go to my Google Analytics traffic, you'll see that all of a sudden I'm getting a huge spike in traffic. And if this continues to go up, I don't want to have to pay a bunch of money to like have my stuff hosted. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. Hope you guys enjoyed this little overview, this walkthrough. I do want to let you know that I have a Discord. You guys are welcome to join if you just want to find a place to hang out with some other developers. And like always, have a good day and happy coding.